Hey guys, Yasin here from Fantasy Life app, and I have Byron with Rosterwatch here. We're going to be reacting live to all the news that's coming out. We have a lot of NFL news expected today. We have Friday slate of practices, which is the last day of practices for Sunday games, so it's an important day. Byron is a fantastic analyst. He visits all of the training camps in the offseason, gets a good understanding of what these guys are up to, what their pecking order might be. So I'm going to be just moving the conversation along, and Byron's going to be giving his expert input. So come in, join us as we ask and answer questions, and let us know what you want to talk about. But Byron, to get it kicked off, why don't we talk about Leonard Fournette a little bit? Because it looks like he wasn't going to be practicing today again. So tell us a little bit about what you're thinking there.
Well, I mean, 3 missed practices in a row is obviously very cryptic for Fournette, and this situation I'm pretty close to, Yasin, because I spent a lot of time at Buccaneers and Jaguars training camp this summer evaluating those specific running back situations. So I've seen a lot of Ronald Jones and a lot of Fournette at this point, and I think it was always going to be a matchup-based flex type of situation. Unfortunately, that was going to be relatively cannibalistic, but this is what you're hoping for. You're hoping for a little bit of clarity in that backfield. Ronald Jones pre-Leonard Fournette while I was at camp was getting 90+% of the first team snaps. So I think we could see LaShawn McCoy or maybe even the rookie Keyshawn Vaughn out of Vanderbilt, the 3rd-round pick. I think we could see those guys potentially get a little bit involved. But look, this is a game script at home against the Los Angeles Chargers with a rookie quarterback that sets up pretty well for the Bucs to be able to create a positive game script, hopefully get a lead and run the ball with a little bit more frequency. So I think anytime, if you're a Ronald Jones owner, I mean, this is what you've been waiting for. So unless you have some other really strong flex options, I think that most individuals are going to want to take a long look at playing Ronald Jones in their flex this weekend. I can tell you, Yasin, that I personally will be doing that exact same thing.
Cool.
I will be playing Ronald Jones in my flex.
And it looks like Scotty Miller has returned to practice, at least on a limited basis. Chris Godwin's still not there at practice, though. Any worries about him? Any backup plans?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Godwin owner, man, it's been tough, right? Like, it's just been the concussions and the hamstring, and it's a tough situation because the minute he gets in the game, he's been really, really good, right? So, Scotty Miller at training camp was very evident that he had a good connection with Tom Brady, and he's really not a slot guy, which is what people try to pigeonhole Miller as. And so clearly to me, he benefits from Godwin's absence. I think you can play Scotty Miller this week if you're in a pinch. Now, you got to remember, it's a tough matchup against these Los Angeles Chargers cornerbacks. Actually, on the matchup tool over at rosterwatch.com, we have the Los Angeles Chargers are basically they're the 3rd to worst matchup in the entire league for opposing wide receivers. So, in a game script too, where Vegas is basically expecting, Tampa to take a lead, they're 7-point favorites at home. We'll see what that results in for the wide receivers. I would say too, though, if you're in a tough spot and you're a Godwin owner, obviously you don't want to sell low on a guy like that. But if you're in win now mode, I think it's okay. I've seen some deals going around with Godwin where maybe you're only getting about a 20% discount on his value, let's say, and you're able to get a guy that can help you win this week. I do think that starts to come into focus. You can only absorb so many of these goose eggs.
Any thoughts
you can't
on
have this dead weight on your bench?
Any thoughts on Terry McLaurin? It looks like he's back at practice today. Steve Sims, by the way, is not. He's been do not practice every day this week. We just sent out that alert about 2 minutes ago. So any thoughts on Terry McLaurin in general?
I mean, it's been a tough play so far this year. I mean, that's just it's a bad team, and Haskins leaves so much to be desired. So I don't know. I see McLaurin he's like a super high upside wide receiver 3 at this moment for me. So I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people are going to have to play him, but he's not a must start guy. I'm looking at this here. So Terry McLaurin, it's the number at home, 45.5 point expected game total. They are 13.5 point dogs, so that sets up for definitely passing situations there for the Redskins. But that's a tough matchup against Baltimore. So
Okay, well, let's move.
you
Let's
don't
move
want to
over.
overthink it, but I think Terry McLaurin, if he plays, is a wide receiver 3.
Okay, cool. So just for everybody in the anybody who's watching right now, we're going to rapid fire, and I'm going to try to move the conversation along quickly. We're going to jump from topic to topic so we can stay on top of everything here. And we're going to eventually get to DeAndre Hopkins, but it looks like Smith, the tackle for Dallas, is going to be playing this Sunday. Does that change your opinion on any offensive weapons for the Cowboys?
Yeah, I mean it's an upgrade for everybody on the Cowboys offense. So you were starting all those guys anyways, but you feel a whole heck of a lot better anytime Tyrone Smith comes in there. I mean, he's one of the true elite players at that position over the last decade.
Awesome. Okay, now this one's big. DeAndre Hopkins. Let's talk about him. I mean, he hasn't really been practicing, right? GM Steve Keim is saying Hopkins will ultimately make his own decision. And it was quoted when we sent this out earlier. One thing about that, Hop knows his body better than anybody. The fact is he doesn't miss football games. From a fantasy perspective, are you starting him? Are you nervous? Are you expecting full production? What's your thought on that?
I mean, if he plays, I'm clearly going to start DeAndre Hopkins at the Carolina Panthers. I mean, you can't, you don't wish too many situations up better than that, right? I mean, you're going to play him. But if he doesn't play, I think the bigger question is there anybody you can pivot to? And I'm just not sure that you can, because it looks like Christian Kirk is on the verge of returning, and he was about a 70% snap count before he got injured. But now we've seen not only Andy Isabella with the 2 touchdowns, but Keyshawn Johnson. No, not that Keyshawn Johnson, but second-year undrafted free agent rookie Keyshawn Johnson is actually the guy who slid in for Kirk this last week, and I just think it's probably a mess behind Hopkins. It'd be very difficult to pinpoint one guy to start.
Okay. Let's talk about the Eagles, which is a sore topic if you're from Philadelphia. But no practice again today for Deshaun Jackson. What are you thinking?
I mean, Zach Ertz is pretty much what I'm thinking when you've got all of these injuries. It's been a terrible start for Zach Ertz owners, really, this year, or a slow start. So I think this is potentially a really good get-right spot for him. I mean, I think this is a Zach Ertz, Miles Sanders offense right now. So
cool.
Got those guys, you're playing them,
Great. We have a question, CeeDee Lamb or McLaurin, full PPR. I have a thought on this. I'd like to know what your thought is.
Well, let's see. So we got the Cowboys. Here's the number 3 matchup on a 56-point game total. I mean, I'm going to be playing CeeDee Lamb in this one. And by the way, the other reason that Tyrone Smith coming back is an important upgrade for all these guys is they got Myles Garrett on the other side with the Browns. I mean, he's an absolute monster. So this is very, very key aspect of that matchup. And I think Lamb stands to benefit.
So speaking of the Browns, Odell was limited in practice yesterday because of his back. It looks like he's there for practice right now. Unsure if he's going to be limited or not. And word on the street is he's not necessarily going to be out or anything, or even limited during the game. But what is his outlook, in your opinion, for his game this week?
I mean, I don't think it's a horrible spot for Odell. I think that people get too high and a little bit too low on Odell. I mean, in a perfect world, I think he's like a high upside wide receiver 3 on your team. But there's a lot of people that have to play him as a 2. So, what options do you have that are going to be, better than that? In this game, they're going to need Odell back up.
Cool. Chris Carson. So we just sent out an alert literally 38 seconds ago. Carroll had a few injury updates in his weekly talk. He says that Jamal Adams won't make it Sunday, but he has a much better update for Chris Carson, who had, quote, had an excellent week and bounced right back. Any thoughts on the Seahawks?
Yeah, I would treat those guys like flex plays. I mean, both Hyde and Carson. I would still imagine Carlos Hyde, if you picked him up this week hoping that you could slide him in a pinch with the Carson injury, I think there's still some viability. I'd certainly downgrade that to a low-end flex play, but I think it's going to be a split backfield in a great matchup for those Seattle running backs.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to let's see what else is coming out right now in the news feed. So again, guys, Yasin here from the Fantasy Life app. Byron here from Rosterwatch, rosterwatch.com. Byron, I've been told that our faces look unnaturally wide on YouTube at the moment, so apologies for making your dimensions look awkward. All right, so let's take a look at.
See if I can back away here a little bit.
I mean, it's you and me both. We unfortunately, whatever the resolution is, it's making us look a little wide. That's fine. So let's talk Texans, Vikings. Their game on Sunday is on. Unfortunately, for another team or two, their game got postponed. So we're not going to see the Steelers or the Titans. What are you thinking in terms of those two teams? I mean, I guess there are a few positives there. A.J. Brown gets another week of rest, right? What are your thoughts long term for these teams?
I mean, it's just my main thought is that it really sucks if you own any of those guys. But this is what we were preparing for all off season, and I think we got like a false sense of security here that early in the season we weren't going to have to really deal with this. That's a reminder, like there could be a lot of this wackiness in store. So I mean, this is why you're gonna, truthfully, Yasin, this is why you gotta have a really deep bench this year, is because things like this are gonna come up at any minute, and you're gonna have to slide those guys into your starting lineup. So I think this week, I mean, you're looking at losing Derrick Henry, James Conner. I mean, you don't just replace those guys, right? Yeah. I mean, so that's pretty tough. And then, yeah, as far as the return, I think we're all, A.J. Brown is a guy that everybody's looking forward to seeing, what he can do when he comes back healthy. And like you say, this buys a little bit more time.
Yeah. Let's talk. Somebody's got a question. We'll assume it's PPR. Antonio Gibson or Latavius Murray?
Antonio Gibson. I know it's a tough matchup, but I mean, start to starter, and he's a good player.
You have any thoughts on him long term? Any thoughts on that team, on that football team long term?
Let's talk about Gibson. Yeah, I mean, Gibson, I think, is a nice player to hold the rest of the season. He's going to be a player you can consistently play as a flex and feel pretty good about it. He's the future of that backfield. They're featuring him. He can't really get game scripted out too badly because he's good in the passing game. And look, he's a rookie that's a convert from a wide receiver. So for him to even get this much playing time early in the season is a huge endorsement. And to me, he's only going to get more comfortable in his role. Will only grow. I mean, we're talking about J.D. McKissick and Peyton Barber. These are career journeyman backup running backs. They didn't cut Adrian. Even Adrian Peterson said when he got cut, the reason he got cut was because the team loved Gibson so much. A player we saw at the Senior Bowl and fell in love with. He's got a lot of Joe Mixon to his style. So, like, man, he's a hold. He's a hold, and he has some upside to continue to. He might be an RB2 when it's all said and done. Certainly a nice flex rest of season.
Cool. So while we're talking about the team from Washington, let's talk about Chase Young. They pulled him from that game quite quickly, and they ruled him out very quickly. Normally, that would make somebody nervous that there's a serious injury. We learned later that they kept him out just out of abundance of caution. I mean, they're really protecting this guy. To me, that reads as a team that wants to think of not this year, but the following year, because they don't want to risk anybody to injury. Is this going to be a player who can really disrupt offenses that's going to be held back and not really produce the way that he can produce this year? Or what are your thoughts there?
He's a franchise. I mean, so it stands to reason that they're going to be careful with him, especially after the bloodbath we saw in the first couple of weeks of the NFL. Like, this is no joke, man. You a guy like that blows his Achilles, he's maybe not the same player ever again. So I get them being cautious with him, but yeah, Chase Young's a freak, man. I mean, he's in we just talked about it. Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa. I mean, he's in that class. I mean, of the most elite, pass rushers that have come out in the last decade. So he's going to terrorize this league for years to come, and he's looked pretty damn good for a rookie.
Cool. So we have somebody asking a question, Ryan, who's sounds like he's forced between McLaurin or Higgins in PPR. He's mentioning that Baltimore is worrying him, and his options are limited because of the Steelers game being postponed. What do you think between McLaurin or Higgins?
I mean, at this point, I would still play Terry McLaurin. I wouldn't I wouldn't outsmart myself on that one. But I think Higgins is a great guy to have on your team to see what happens this next week or two. You may have something real important on your hands the rest of the way.
Cool. All right, so again, guys, Yasin here from the Fantasy Life app. We also have Byron from Rosterwatch. We're going to be answering your questions here live as well as reacting to any news that comes out. Again, it's probably the most important practice day of the week. It is Friday. That means that it's the last day to designate players as questionable or doubtful or clear to go for the games on Sunday. And it is the second day of practice for the Monday night games. That said, why don't we talk about the game a little bit last night? You have tight end Noah Fant, who was ruled out. It sounds like it's not a major injury, but do you have thoughts on, really, we can talk about their entire offense, because Denver sort of lost a lot of their weapons. And then the guy that's really, slinging the ball is it's a question mark. It's unclear who will be quarterback each week. So what are your thoughts? Who are you hanging on to? Who deserves a spot on your bench until things maybe clear up there in Denver?
I mean, Noah Fant is definitely a key. He's an awesome prospect, and he's looked great this season. And the loss of Courtland Sutton is an absolute boon for a guy like Noah Fant, who seemed to be taking kind of that second-year step forward. And given the state of the tight end position, I mean, Noah Fant has been one of the top performers at the position through, the outside of the season here. So I think he's an absolute hold, especially since we know Drew Lock is nearing a return sooner than later. And we've been hearing, potentially as soon as next week. So Noah Fant's an awesome tight end. Hold on to Noah Fant. The guy is Jerry Jeudy. I mean, truthfully, it would have been really sharp. I'm a Jerry Jeudy owner. I wish I talked more about it, last week, even with our subscribers and followers over at Rosterwatch. Yasin, he really is a great buy low trade target this last week or so. But and I think it was especially masked because they have the backup quarterback situation there. But no Courtland Sutton. Who are they going? That's who they're. He's going to be the feature guy, and he's one of these rare cats that he has the ability. He can shake anybody in this league as a rookie. I mean, we've learned over the years scouting these guys that the players that are the best separators and route runners. Think about Odell Beckham when he came out, had that big rookie year. It's because he could separate. So that's what we have in Jerry Jeudy, and I just think you got Locke coming back pretty soon. He is going to get a boatload of targets, and he's got big plays just written all over him. So I'm in love with Jerry Jeudy the rest of the season. I think he's a very, very important player. If you could still buy low on him, I think you should. That ship may have sailed, and I think Melvin Gordon is a hold. People, I think, are going to obviously, we got the great game last night. Before last night's game, the market was starting to overreact to the Philip Lindsay return news. And I just think in the end, you need to recognize that Melvin Gordon's going to be the RB2 that you drafted him to be, possibly with upside still based on what we saw last night. So don't get too down on him. I think Melvin Gordon is a fine hold. Don't worry about.
So let's talk about Melvin Gordon. My personal opinion is that his stat line yesterday was overinflated by a 43-yard touchdown that probably shouldn't have happened anyway. So we should, in my opinion, we should probably scale that back. He probably shouldn't have had, and I personally wouldn't expect him to have a 2-touchdown game often. So do you think this is a good time to say, hey, this is potentially the Melvin Gordon show in people's minds, so maybe he's a sell high candidate?
Well, you raise a good point. I think that once you take in the fallout from last night, it changes his market value a little bit. So, I've kind of had a valuation on him this week on the trade market before the game started, and I'd seen an overreaction with the Philip Lindsay news there, and I thought he was a hold. But you raise a great point, Yasin. I think once we see that big game last night for your opponents in your league that are only looking at the bottom line, like fantasy box score, he could be a sell high. And the question is, who are you going to sell him high for? Who can you trade up for? I mean, to really you don't want to make a marginal difference. So there's two kinds of trades, Yasin. The two principal types of trades that people are going to be engaging in this season. There's the consolidation trade. That's when you're buying. That's when you're big game hunting. That's when you're taking a couple of your good players, you're consolidating them to try to level up to maybe an elite player in your league, thereby enhancing your roster and liberating a waiver spot. So Gordon, can you take Gordon and another player and go trade for a Zeke Elliott, like that would be a difference-making move to move up to that level. I think anything else might be marginal. The flip side is if you are a losing team, winning teams engage consolidation trades. It's the winning strategy. If you're a losing team and you've identified, Yasin, that the reason you're losing, which is very likely to be the case, is that you are not fielding a competitive starting lineup every week, and every week you've got like a couple of holes in your starting lineup, and you're struggling to fill them, and those guys aren't coming through for you. In that case, if you're a Gordon owner, I think that would be a good time to liquidate him coming off of this game into two good players you think you're maybe buying a little low on that can become starters for you and help complete your starting lineup and make you more competitive on a weekly basis. I think that would be an appropriate way you could consider liquidating Melvin Gordon if you're a losing team coming off this big.
Cool. I want to, while we're still on the Broncos offense, you were talking about how you're really impressed with Fant. He puts up numbers. I need to point out the language that you used. You actually still called him a prospect. Why is that?
Well, because he has not become a 3-down tight end. He still leaves something to be desired in the blocking game, and they drafted another rookie tight end this year. They have kind of an extensive depth chart of middling young guys there at the tight end position. So, I think ultimately, though, what we're going to want to do is you got to look at the snap counts, Yasin. So let's see. I'm not going to have them. I don't have them on tap from last night's game, but if we go back before into week 3, Noah Fant, 84% snap count. So, that's what you're looking for. I mean, you get concerned that if he's not viewed as a 3-down capable blocker within his own organization, that he won't get the snap counts. But I don't think they've had a choice but to throw him out there given the circumstances with the injuries in Denver.
All right, I'm going to give you a layup here. Byron, as one of the founders of Rosterwatch, what tool were you using to find that snap count assessment that you got to so quickly?
All of you guys can use it. It's the snap counts, touches, and targets tool over at Rosterwatch. It's available to all RotoPass subscribers, Yasin. It's available to all of our followers and subscribers at Rosterwatch. And it's every week where you can go in and see all of the skilled players in the league, how many touches, how many targets, and what snap count percentage they've played in. Not enough people look at snap counts because that's really indicative of opportunity, Yasin. So a lot of folks will be only looking at targets or bottom line production, and you're really kind of missing something if you're not drilling down and seeing what the usage looks like. It's a great way to make every week you've got a couple of decisions that are like, it feels like a 50-50 point flip, like deciding between player A and player B. Snap count percentage is one of those great metrics to go to help split those hairs as you're making those really tough decisions, those flex decisions oftentimes.
Cool. All right, so let's go to the chat. Somebody's asking if they should trade Connor and Keenan Allen for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. His or her other receivers are Galladay, Deontay Johnson, Higgins, and Alshon. Let's assume PPR.
No, I wouldn't do that deal unless I was absolutely desperate at running back this week because Connor is out. So you're telling me he wants to trade Connor and Keenan Allen for Clyde Edwards-Helaire? I'm only even contemplating that if I'm in desperation mode at running back because I'm minus James Conner.
Cool. All right, let's talk.
It is a tough matchup for Keenan Allen, so I see where that user's head is at.
Okay. Let's talk Will Fuller. Somebody mentioned that they rage dropped Will Fuller. They are shaking their head. Is this justified? Is this an overreaction? What is your long-term outlook on Will Fuller? I guess going back 3 years now, I think the feel is this guy has so much potential, and his potential is never made kinetic. It's like the ceiling is high, but this guy stumbles up the stairs getting to the ceiling. So, what are your thoughts on Will Fuller?
First of all, that is hilarious that somebody quote-unquote rage dropped Will Fuller. Yeah, of course it was an overreaction. Why else would that individual be enraged? Because they know that it was an overreaction. Will Fuller is what he is, man. I mean, at this point, he's not a new guy in the league. We know the Texans know, everybody knows what Will Fuller is. The difference was you were able to kind of project that his volume would be amplified this year, so that would be a mitigating factor that kind of raise his status, and it has when he's healthy. But this is just always going to be the situation with Will Fuller. So yeah, it was an overreaction, but you better if he's one of your core wide receivers, you're going to have to make sure that you fortify that wide receiver depth chart. You're going to have some other good option because he's a liability to miss a game, at any point. And the truth is, nobody's talking about Brandon Cooks, Yasin, but Brandon Cooks is very much in a sneaky way. Snap counts, targets starting to come alive. And actually, if you're watching the games, look kind of good there in Houston. I think we're on the verge of this Houston Texans offense breaking out. So that's another reason that I would not want to go too cold on any of these Texans right now.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so let's talk. So there's a question about the Titans. This person, and I actually have an opinion on this, so I'll share first, and then you can go ahead and either build up that opinion or react to it and disagree. But they're mentioning that with the Titans possibly out for multiple weeks, is there anyone on the Titans worth trying to target for a trade? And what do you think the discount might be? My personal thought is if you're already a contender and you can get through the next week or the next 2 weeks or the next 3 weeks and it's not going to negatively affect you by not having these players, absolutely go all in and try to pick up guys, especially if they're held by somebody who's not a contender and maybe in panic mode. You can improve their roster and really improve your own roster if you have pieces to give up. Now, my personal advice on any trades in general is to make sure when you're trading, the psychology behind it is you want to let the person that you're trading with think that they're getting an awesome player or an awesome deal. Put that person into one of your starting positions. So if it's a wide receiver or a running back, don't show the person that you're trading with that you think that this is a bench player. Put them into your starting lineup. You can always change it on Sunday morning, but let them think that you're willing to give up one of your starters for somebody that they are looking to trade for. It's always going to work in your favor. There's psychology there, even if it's not a true starter on your team.
What a shell game, Yasin. Yeah, I mean, you got leverage, right? So maybe that's a way to manufacture a little bit of leverage over there. You got to get your counterpart excited in the deal, get them lathered up a little bit. So maybe you can do that way. Look, so generally speaking, we've got to live for today in fantasy. Your focus, and every year this becomes more evident to me, has to be on winning this week. Even if you've got a winning record, it's too oftentimes we outsmart ourselves planning for the future in fantasy. So that said, in this situation, there's really only one guy I'm going out of my way for to make a trade and to pursue, and that would be Derrick Henry. He's the big fish here, and he's the one that I'm certain is going to be an excellent player the rest of the year, and he's the kind of guy that would be a massive difference maker. Now, to do that, I think that you need to I know that you need to be undefeated, and you need to be operating from what I call a position of luxury, which means you need to not only be undefeated to pursue Derrick Henry right now, but you need to be so lavish with assets from the top to bottom of your roster that you can fork up whatever it's going to take to get him, and it's not going to cost you here in the meantime while you absorb this missed week, basically. So yeah, look, the trade market's about being opportunistic. There would be no player I would get more excited about an opportunistic deal on it, in this situation than Henry. And then I think it trickles down. If you can't get a Henry deal, you could look at Connor. It doesn't get me as excited. I don't trust him as much, but certainly he looks really good. So I think he's an option. And AJ Brown, maybe he was a hyper efficient player last year that really most of the sharps were expecting regression for this year. You're still going to be tied to a low-volume passing game with Ryan Tannehill. He's already been injured this year. I just don't know how much I'm going out of my way for A.J. Brown or even like maybe a Jonnu Smith. If you somehow need to get some tight end depth, maybe you could somehow scoop him up. But I think Henry is that should be the source of your focus if you're undefeated and you want to capitalize on this situation.
And do you have any sense on what the discount might be for people that are holding on to their Titans players? How much should they be
Well, you're
discounted?
going to have to send them 2 players. I mean, my rule. I mean, generally speaking, to keep this simple, you're gonna have to send. I mean, it could be a 1-for-1 if somebody's really desperate, but I think somebody who's in such a pinch that they are willing to ship Derrick Henry off this week because he's not available to them. They need 2 players. More than likely, they need 2 players they can start this week that will help them win this week. So what's the discount? I don't think it's a huge discount, but I think the fact that Derrick Henry is available, that's the big news. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be available. So I don't know, 10%, 15% discount, maybe 20 max. I think anytime you're taking a couple of flex players that are maybe you view as overperforming and guys that you can replace on the waiver wire here in the coming weeks, I mean, I think it's shrewd, and ultimately you are still buying low that way.
Cool. Let's go back to DeAndre Hopkins. So I know we touched on him earlier, but he is not practicing during the open portion of practice right now. We obviously know he already missed Wednesday. He missed Thursday. He's not practicing today. We know what was talked about earlier today with the general manager saying that it's going to be up to him if he can play or not. He's a guy that doesn't typically miss games. I think it's worth revisiting the conversation around DeAndre Hopkins again during this recording for anybody that might be joining new.
Well, I mean, if DeAndre Hopkins, if we hear that he's going to play, I mean, you're going to get him in your lineup. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's a dreamy matchup at Carolina, and really so much of this comes down to what other options do you have? I mean, it's great to pontificate about, but if you have nothing but crappy options behind him, you're not going to bench him. To me, like I said earlier, the bigger question is, we saw the Andy Isabella breakout last week with the touchdowns, only a 40% snap count. We're hearing Christian Kirk's going to re-enter the lineup. There were some people picking up Fitzgerald off the waivers last year, and then all of a sudden you see Keyshawn Johnson, the undrafted second-year rookie free agent, get the 70%. He's a guy they've liked ever since they picked him up in undrafted free agency. They like him in the building there. He's a Cliff Kingsbury guy, actually. So I think it's a mess behind Hopkins. I think it'd be really difficult to pinpoint anybody else you could get excited or feel comfortable playing there. I think they would all be kind of Hail Marys or low, obviously low floor kind of.
So here's the good news. The Arizona-Carolina kickoff time is in the first slate of games on Sunday. So as you guys know, we send out inactives as soon as we get them, right around 90 minutes before kickoff. So you will have time to adjust if Hopkins is ruled out for some reason. Again, it seems like Byron and I agree on this, that we don't expect him to be out. There's always the possibility of somebody being on a snap count of some sort. I don't think that's going to be the case here. I think if he's good to go, he's good to go. There is some good news there where you have time to adjust if necessary. Let's go back to the Browns. Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt didn't practice on Wednesday with a groin injury. Kareem Hunt didn't practice on, let me make sure. Kareem Hunt didn't practice on Thursday with that groin injury. Kareem Hunt is practicing during the open portion of media today. We just sent that out 27 minutes ago. It's unclear if he will be officially limited. My guess is they will have to state that he's questionable because he's had 2 DNPs in a row, even if today is a full participant. So what are your thoughts on Kareem Hunt? What impact could it have if Hunt ends up sitting or is limited on the rest of that offense?
Well, if Hunt plays, I think that he's clearly a guy you can continue to roll out in your flex, especially with a projected 56-point game total on this one on the road, Yasin. And the thing about it is, it's a somewhat difficult matchup for fantasy running backs. The Dallas Cowboys are, but in a game like this, Kareem Hunt's a player who's not going to get game scripted out, and he's the player that's receiving the targets in this offense. So even if it becomes, because here's the concern with the Browns backfield, like Nick Chubb been going bananas the last few weeks, right? But the situation is they've been beating up on patsies at home, where they've been able to run the ball 40 times because the game script has been favorable for it, and that's been successful. So you get concerned when you look at Nick Chubb and you say, okay, he's a 59% snap count guy, only gets 1 target a game, and he's both these guys are extremely touchdown dependent, which is totally unpredictable. Those are all signs of like overperformance, and there could be some regression. So you say, well, but wait a second. The Browns are committed to playing that ground and pound style. So I think for Nick Chubb, and specifically for Nick Chubb owners, I think so much has to depend on what you're going to expect from him on a weekly basis. Will be dependent on what the matchup looks like. Like, is it a game where they can get ahead and really ground and pound, or if not, those become a little bit more Kareem Hunt games. And I think you do have to bring your expectations down for Chubb a little bit, in those matchups, Yasin. So I think they're both, they're obviously both fine plays this week. But if I'm a Kareem Hunt owner and he goes, no problem. If he sits, it's a week where I would have been a little bit concerned about Nick Chubb that I start to feel a lot better.
Do you think Kareem Hunt actually improves the potential output for Chubb?
I mean, it's an interesting question. In this particular matchup or on the season?
On the season.
I think it's creative, and I can see some galaxy brain folks making an argument for that, but I in the end, I think having another back with that kind of talent, it doesn't. No. I think Nick Chubb would have more fantasy points at the end of the season if he didn't have Kareem Hunt to contend with.
It's just very rare to see two fantasy productive running backs on the same team actually produce numbers where one is a viable RB1 and one is, in some cases, not a bad RB2.
It's incredible. They complement each other. They've devised the right offensive strategy. I do think that it's not always going to work on a week-to-week basis, like I said, based on the matchups. For me, as a football fan, as somebody who has scouted these players for the last 10 years, scouts the league, just watches the evolution of the game, I'm just thrilled. To me, it's so exciting because it looks like the NFL version of like some awesome college backfield.
Mm-hmm.
Watch. How cool is it to watch this dual tandem? It almost feels like you're just watching a college backfield going bananas, but it's a real it's the pro version of it. I think it's really exciting to watch these Browns run the ball when they're hot this year.
Let's talk about Jamal Adams. So he's obviously going to be out. What does that mean? Who does that impact the most, and why? Who are you upgrading or downgrading based on that?
I mean, you got to upgrade Gesicki. I think you even got to upgrade Myles Gaskin. I mean, considering what kind of player Jamal Adams is in run support. So those are the two guys that maybe people don't immediately think about that I say they get an upgrade. They get an upgrade for sure. Heck, Ryan Fitzpatrick gets an upgrade, right? If he doesn't have to contend with Jamal Adams. So, and truthfully, if that becomes a more competitive, higher scoring affair because of that, then all of that and kind of backdoor benefits all the Seahawks players in this game. More points are better for everybody, and you take away a key defender like that on a Seahawks defense that's already not really, what we've been accustomed to over the years. That one could turn into a sneaky shootout, Yasin.
Cool. So let's stay in Seattle. Let's talk about Russell Wilson a little bit. I mean, the guy is playing he should get MVP votes this year, finally. Are we expecting a regression? Is this sustainable at all? Obviously, it seems like he's going to be a productive fantasy quarterback for the rest of the year. But is this level of production just, I would say it's not sustainable. What are you thinking?
Clearly, it's unsustainable from the touchdown perspective. I do think that there's been a few games where the yardage hasn't necessarily been eye-popping, and maybe his rushing yardage hasn't been eye-popping. So I think we could pick him. We might see him pick up a little bit there, and that could be a bit of a mitigating factor when we see the touchdown. It's not, if we see the touchdown regression, it's when we see the touchdown regression. But I mean, this is a perfect offense, and he's got the perfect guys to throw to. So, I mean, Russell Wilson he can easily finish his QB1 this year, right?
All right, let's talk about some of those guys that he throws to. So last week we saw an embarrassing drop by Metcalf, celebrating a little early, but it seems like everything is lining up for this guy. I mean, his yards per target is ridiculous. I think it's somewhere over 12 yards. And then obviously you have Lockett, who had a monster of a game last week. I would think that that might be a guy that you could sell high right now, but you might look back on it later and say maybe I shouldn't have sold him at all. What do you think of his two main targets there?
They're awesome. Two guys that we've scouted intimately since both of them came out of college that we love. Like we saw Tyler. So I'm a Big 12 guy. I'm a Longhorn. My business partner Alex, he's covered the Longhorns in the Big 12 years. So, well, of course, we watched a lot of Tyler Lockett coming out of K-State. He blew us away when we saw him at the Senior Bowl. I guess what was that, probably 4 years ago at this point. And I've been to Seahawks training camp for 3 different times, so I've seen a lot of Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett. Lockett's the real deal, man. I mean, sure, there's almost anybody that's not at the very top of the food chain could, in theory, become a sell high. So it depends on who you're selling high up to get. I mean, can you use them to get up to a Zeke or a Devontae Adams or one of these Michael Thomas? Then maybe then maybe we would be talking a little bit there. But yeah.
So somebody's asking
as far as Metcalf, dude. Go ahead.
No, go ahead on Metcalf.
Yeah, I was just saying Metcalf. I mean, I went to his pro day at Ole Miss to scout him, and I left that pro day, and I tweeted out. I said, well, it wasn't a Mike Evans pro day, but it was in the ballpark, and it was close. And I predicted, I said, there was a lot of knocks on his agility and also just his production and the hands. And I just said, based on his physical, I've scouted these players for too many years. I said, based on this guy's measurables, I don't see how he gets out of the first round. People were shocked when he fell to the second round, and I just think in retrospect now we see all day, every day, his measurables are too impressive. He's too big, too fast of a guy, and the fact is he's naturally a pretty good wide receiver too. So he's a match made in heaven with the way that Russell Wilson likes to drop that deep bomb.
Cool. So somebody's asking about the possibility of Carson or Raheem starting. Let me address that first. Carson seems like he's going to be playing on Sunday. I don't think there's much of a question anymore, but pay attention to the official injury report later today on that. But I would guess that Carson will be starting and won't be limited come Sunday. Again, I'll pull up the last news we put out on him, but he's looking fine. And then on Mostert, I think the outlook on him medically is worse for this week playing at all compared to Carson. And then asking as a backup option for either of them, Francisco is asking if Hyde is healthy enough to start. So in a scenario where Carson is not starting, and again, I think he will be, is Hyde healthy enough to start as a reliable fantasy option?
I think it's risky, but if I was in a desperation or a real pinch type situation, I would put Carlos Hyde in as a flex, or like my flex 2, my very last flex if I needed to this week. It would be somewhat begrudgingly, but there's some logic to back the play up. I'm not totally against it. I think he's still got some viability if you have to.
Cool. All right, so let's take a look at the board. So if you guys don't know, this is the board that I use for Sundays to help us organize inactives. So those are magnets and a board that we use to make sure that we're checking off who is and who is not going to be playing. Obviously, the Tennessee-Pittsburgh magnets are upside down. There we go. The Steelers and Titans game will be played in Week 7, by the way. That will likely be coming out on your Fantasy Life app alerts in just a few seconds. But that game will be played on Week 7. Let's talk about the Colts and the Bears. Colts and Bears. Any players on either of those rosters that you think are worthy of talking about, mentioning, maybe decent pickups, or people that maybe you're fading on either of those teams?
Well, you're clearly feeling good about the volume David Montgomery is going to receive moving forward. So if you're a Montgomery owner, or maybe if the Montgomery owner in your league is still low on him, just based on everything we've known about David Montgomery and experienced with him to this point, I think he's a good a good pickup, or if you don't have him, or if you have him, I think he's a good hold. That things are looking very, very up the rest of the season, especially on the PPR side. He's a guy who can catch the football. He's got 3-down capability. And I think he'll pick up some extra targets here with Tariq Cohen out, which is, as we know in fantasy, not only are the targets good for PPR scoring, but we know that in fantasy, targets on average result, receptions on average result in more fantasy points, even for running backs than carries. So regardless of the format, if you've got a guy like Montgomery who's going to see an uptick in usage in the passing game, that's a real positive. Now, look, Nick Foles, the Bears were 2-0. Nobody knew Nick Foles was about to walk in and get this job. This was an early gift for anybody that's invested in the Bears offense. Now, this was all part of the preseason evaluation, is that somewhere along the line, Foles would likely get the opportunity. But going into week 3, nobody knew because the Bears were undefeated. So this was like an early Christmas present, early boon for all those guys. I do think there's a bit of a cautionary tale with Allen Robinson, who has a very difficult next 6 weeks of matchups, including this week. It's the worst matchup in the league at home against the Indianapolis Colts for fantasy wide receivers per the matchup tool at rosterwatch.com, Yasin. There is a treacherous schedule for the next 6 weeks ahead for Allen Robinson. However, I think Nick Foles coming into the mix there is a mitigating factor that could help you overcome that. So part of me thinks Allen Robinson could be a little bit of a sell high right now. Part of me thinks that getting Nick Foles is, could make enough of a difference that we don't have to really sweat that so much. And then I think the sneaky thing, too, to consider here is that the loss of Tariq Cohen could result in more targets for Anthony Miller, Yasin. A player who's really flashed, but obviously been inconsistent at the hands of Mitch Trubisky and head coach Matt Nagy there. And injuries have caused a problem, and he's had a few drops that have been an issue. But I really do think that Anthony Miller is an ancillary guy that we could see an uptick here. That could be kind of a sneaky guy to pick up if he's on your waivers, or if you can get him as just like a throw-in on a trade right now. And there's a little bit of non-traditional logic that Cordero Patterson could even see a little bit of an uptick here, sans in the post-Tariq Cohen era. Will it be enough to make him a guy you can start? I'm not sure, but maybe enough to make him a watch list guy.
Cool. All right, so let's talk about the Colts. So Hilton, I think we've seen more drops from him this year than certainly more than last year and the year before, and in total. And it's already, it's just we're going into week 4. So can we talk about Hilton? Is he, what's the deal? Why does he have so many drops compared to previous years?
Yeah, his grandmother's really upset with him. She told him that she watched his game and she's never seen him play like this. Look, he's not Phillip Rivers' guy. And Phillip Rivers kind of has a rag arm at this point. So he's not going to be throwing all the downfield stuff to T.Y. Hilton. And I think Hilton can get open on the intermediate and short stuff pretty easily. But, Rivers traditionally has liked a little bigger body target than that. So I'm not real confident. We're going to see Hilton will bounce back here and there along the way, but I don't think he's a guy that you can really have much faith in at this point. I want to look up the snap counts here just in case, just to double check this, Yasin. And then Mo Alley Cox. We know Jack Doyle is back in the mix, but I think it's pretty evident if you're watching the games that Mo Alley Cox looks like the superior, athletic weapon that this team is wanting to use, especially in the red zone. So I think Mo Alley Cox at tight end is a sneaky guy to look at there on the Colts side. So let me see. T.Y. Hilton, only a 52% snap count, only 3 targets for T.Y. Hilton in week 3. Yasin, a 58% snap count in week 2. So T.Y. Hilton, a sub 60% snap count guy. In the last 2 weeks, that's a problem. Week 1, he was an 80% snap count. That's what we got to monitor. But
especially if half of these targets, if he's not catching those targets, then he's not going to make the most of getting sub 60% snap count. So who are the beneficiaries of the snaps that Hilton is not getting?
Well, it's been you're hearing a little bit of talk about you've been hearing a little bit of talk about Zach Pascal. I mean, he's a guy that we've seen pop up in recent years. Michael Pittman has the compartment syndrome in the calf, so he's going to be out there. He had been a beneficiary. The rookie there. Seen Doris Fountain, a guy that we had to watch deep on our waiver wires at times last year, 32% snap counts. So this last week, Zach Pascal, 93% snap count, Yasin. I mean, that's the guy. 4 targets. He's a Jag, though. I mean, you can't. It's a miracle. You could put him in. It's based on his snap count, but it's a miracle if it's it's a one-outer. I don't know if you play cards or not, but it's a one-outer if Zach. It's the thinnest play you can possibly imagine. But yeah, at Hilton's expense, it looks like it's Pascal. It was a little bit of Pittman, a little bit of Doris Fountain, but maybe in the post-Pittman. Pittman's kind of hung up on IR. Maybe we see Hilton get a little bump here, Yasin. I'll tell you what, if he gets a bump and you can get anything out of him, package him up and sell him while you can. I mean, especially because he still has some name value. That's exactly what I'd be looking. The minute I could get Hilton's value up to sell him is the minute I would be trying my hardest to peddle him and get him off my team.
Cool. Let's talk about, so we talked about Cleveland and Dallas. We talked about the Seahawks. We talked a little bit about Miami. We haven't talked about Saints and Lions. Obviously, the big question on a lot of people that are following that game, it's a 1 o'clock game on Sunday, is going to be Michael Thomas. I think we have to assume, to be safe, that he won't play. Okay, here we go. New news, Chris Godwin, Leonard Fournette have been ruled out officially. That you will see come across very soon on Fantasy Life app. So let's talk about that. Chris Godwin, Leonard Fournette, they're ruled out. Scotty Miller got some work in today, and they'll see how he's doing tomorrow. What are your thoughts? How does this affect the rest of that Tampa Bay offense?
My thoughts are that the arrows here point obviously to Mike Evans, but this is a difficult matchup against Casey Hayward. Now, that's a tough matchup for Mike Evans. So, who's been a little bit touchdown dependent. Anytime you're minus Godwin, a little bit of a boon for Evans, so you feel good there. We saw Gronk get involved last week. Now, the big development with Gronk last week was I think he was nearly a 90% snap count last week, which he almost doubled up O.J. Howard on snap counts. So, ultimately, he's Tom Brady's guy. So I think Gronk comes back into focus as like a desperation low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 play that if you're in a pinch, you can roll them out, cross your fingers, and see what happens. I mean, this is a Chargers team that doesn't have Derwin James, of course. Scotty Miller, though, man, I mean, I'll tell you, I would have been pretty excited about him anytime Godwin's out. But if he's a little injured and it's a really difficult matchup here, I'm not sure we go chasing Scotty Miller. I think sometimes the best decisions are just to look elsewhere instead of trying to be the smartest guy in the room who tries to unlock this situation. I'm not going to Justin Watson. I'm not going down the depth chart to Tyler Johnson, the rookie. I saw all those guys at camp. Either of them is capable of having a freak good play or getting a touchdown, but I just don't foresee any circumstance where they can be a reliable target. And so this, to me, all roads start to lead back to Ronald Jones then in a game where the Bucs are favorites against a rookie quarterback at home, and I think the Bucs defense is going to stonewall. This is a stout Bucs defense, going to give these Chargers a lot of trouble. We know there's oftentimes a big correlation between the RB1 on a team and a positive defensive performance. I think that's exactly what we're seeing here shape up for Ronald Jones.
Can we talk snap counts from the last few weeks? I mean, we know the big shakeup was Fournette is now on the team, but how do you expect the snap counts to change? What snap count might you expect from a guy like Ronald Jones? And who might be other beneficiaries of Fournette and Godwin being ruled out against the Chargers?
Well, I think there's a chance that Jones' snap counts could go up 75, 80%. And I think that's an outside chance, especially if they bring Keyshawn Vaughn up. We'll see if he gets out there. But dude,
let me interrupt for a second and talk about Keyshawn Vaughn because he will have a role according to the coach. this week. I think he's 5 or 6% owned in most fantasy leagues. My guess is you're going to say he's not really viable in fantasy, but he's going to have an impact on everybody else's fantasy usage. Is that right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't, unless he gets a hot hand, I wouldn't anticipate him getting more than maybe like 5 touches. And Shady is really not more than a 5. And look, in a perfect world, you're giving Vaughn and Shady like a couple of touches in this situation. Could they go more? Could you get 5, 10 touches total out of those guys and to siphon off Ronald? Ronald Jones is not a 20+ touch per game guy anyway, so he's really a 15 to 20. I think in this scenario, 18 to 20, 18 to 22 touch guy. I think that's where we see Jones probably headed this week, minus Fournette. Mostly because they'll probably run the ball with enough volume that even if those guys get a little bit of action, I think Jones will still get his. I think you'll still be praying for the touchdown a little bit with Ronald Jones. They have shown a willingness to throw him the ball. He's not a natural pass catcher, but when I was at camp, he didn't look great, but he was basically catching everything there. So the team trust him. I mean, he's been their starter, and they've kind of acted accordingly with that. So we'll see. If I had to project this, he's basically been, in terms of snap counts, Yasin, I think if I had to guess, I put on a 60% snap count with the ability to go as high as 70, 75.
That's pretty good for a running back, especially when you have other guys that can, spell them a little bit and give them a breather. So I'd say that's a healthy snap percentage, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's good enough to put him on the map as usually, historically, that's like RB2 snap counts.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk. Let's continue with Tampa Bay. It looks like Sean Murphy-Bunting, their cornerback, will be playing. He should be good to go because he practiced in full today. Does that have any impact that you can anticipate for any of the Chargers wide receivers or tight ends?
I mean, Keenan Allen's the kind of guy that can shake anybody, and so that doesn't affect my opinion of Keenan Allen at all. I don't think Mike Williams is impossible to trust right now, so to me, not really even a viable option. So I'm not going to spend too much thinking about how that affects him. And then Hunter Henry's a sneaky little play right now. I mean, it's hard to get excited about him, but I think that if you're a Hunter Henry owner, this is a spot where you still feel okay about getting. You're never going to feel great about Hunter Henry this year, but I think you feel okay this year.
Cool. All right, let's go back to talking about the Saints and the Lions, which we were about to get into, and then we saw that Fournette and Godwin were ruled out. So let's talk about the Saints. Obviously, Mike Thomas is the big news there. It's unclear if he's going to play or not. The most recent word on the street is him practicing doesn't necessarily mean that he'll play. The team might give him extra time to let that ankle heal. So it's not, even though he's been playing, it doesn't mean that even though he's been practicing, it's not a guarantee that he'll play. But they are going up against the Lions. What do you expect to happen between these two teams?
Well, I mean, what we know is that anytime Michael Thomas is out, we definitely need to be rolling out Traquan Smith. I mean, he's the guy you want over Emmanuel Sanders if you have your druthers there in a situation where Thomas isn't there. We didn't get the touchdown last week, but we saw the 100% snap count out of Traquan Smith this last week, and the week before that, he'd had a really nice game with some big plays. So I think that he's the key guy that stays viable if Thomas is unavailable to go. And then, when I look at the rest of the matchup, Yasin, I mean, this is what's the game total on this one? So this is a 54.5 point expected game total right now. New Orleans actually a 4.5 point favorite on the road to Detroit. This is an excellent matchup for the fantasy running backs. So, you've seen no Michael Thomas means more Alvin Kamara. I mean, truthfully, I think this is just an Alvin Kamara offense this year based on where Drew Brees is at in his career, Yasin. And then, I mean, on the other side, who can you play, man? I mean, I guess you could play Adrian Peterson if you're in absolute, running back hell and you don't have another option. I mean, TJ Hawkinson, it's the number one matchup for all fantasy tight ends this week. And Hawkinson hadn't had the big blow-up spots yet, but he's been producing as like a tight end one, and he's the kind of guy that has massive. I mean, C.J. Hawkinson is the best tight end prospect to come into the NFL in the last 10 years.
Let's jump over really quick. I'm going to interrupt you, but I want to jump over really quick to the Jags. DJ Chark will play on Sunday. Brandon Linder has been ruled out, but the big news there is DJ Chark, as expected, I believe, will play on Sunday. What are your expectations?
For DJ Chark?
Yeah.
Or just for that passing game? Well,
let's talk about Chark first, then we can talk about the game in general.
I mean, my expectations are low for DJ Chark, and it's unfortunate because he's a good player. I think they miss him when he's not out there. I mean, you forget DJ Chark, he's 6'4". He's tall, and he's got the range and the speed on the outside. So he does help make that offense go, but Minshew, he spreads the ball around. So I don't know. In that situation, it's the number 22 matchup of the week. It is a 49-point game total. It's on the road. I mean, I'm starting DJ Chark as a wide receiver 3. I think you'd be hard-pressed to have better options than him, and I think if you own him, you've been waiting to, like, at some point, you just start getting your good players in your starting lineup, and you quit overthinking stuff. DJ Chark is a good player. He's back in. You lower expectations and get him in, but I like him as a wide receiver 3 this week.
All right, so Chark, you're expecting to be wide receiver 3. Good to know. So that's on the Jags game. Let's talk a little bit more about them. Some of their other receivers. I know you're a big fan of Shenault. You think he has he's just a big physical guy. What are you expecting? Let's talk about this week, but also for the rest of the season.
I think he's going to be like a matchup-based flex play that has some upside, and certainly there's going to be some weeks where he disappoints, but he's clearly a focal point of that offense. He's one of the very, very important pieces on that team moving forward. He's a guy that just leaps off the field at you when you go scout that team, and every team across the league has a couple of those players, and Shenault's one of them. So it's been clear to me since I was at Jaguars camp that they're going to feature this guy, and I think we've seen it. The problem is, again, you're just buying into that Jags offense, so not every week's going to be a great week. But if I don't own Chark, Shenault's the guy that I want to own. And behind that, I just don't think there's anybody. I mean, Keelan Cole has been a desperation play, but I just don't think there's anybody else you can get. Chris Conley sucks, man. So those are the two guys. Chark and Shenault are beasts. So in the right matchup, I can still feel pretty good about it. Shenault needs to be rostered. He shouldn't be dropped. People were asking us on the site over at Rosterwatch this week, do I need to drop Shenault for a guy like T. Higgins or whatever? Because obviously Justin Jefferson was the top guy on waivers from that rookie class this week. But we had the Brandon Ayuk's, the T. Higgins, there's a couple of those other guys, and said, should I drop Shenault for him? I said no. Shenault is in that same tier with those guys, so that's a lateral move. Don't go out of your way to do that. Keep Shenault.
But on the Jags offense, it sounds like you think the two guys that are rosterable are Shenault and Chark, and Keelan Cole isn't really worth a roster spot.
Yeah, and of course James Robinson, like we told everybody over at the site last week that James Robinson had 4 top 10 matchups in a row on the horizon. He victimized them in the first one last week, so he's got 3 more on the slate here. Nobody's selling low on James Robinson anymore, but I mean, dude, he's an awesome play the next, at least the next 3 weeks, and then at that point we can revisit. I still think down the stretch there could be a whiff of a committee to this backfield at some point. We'll just have to see. He has a chance to run away with it during these juicy matchups, but I think we'll have a natural decision point to kind of revisit what we want to do with James Robinson 3 weeks from now. Yasin.
Cool. We have a question from Kagan. Who should I sit more, Thielen or Boyd, this week?
Oh, jeez, that's so tough, man. I know. I'm just gonna go to our rankings. So it's probably gonna be Boyd. So DJ Moore, we have as a wide receiver 19. The industry kind of has him as a wide receiver 15. Boyd, we have it as a wide receiver 21. The industry has him at wide receiver 23, and then Thielen is wide receiver 10 and 14 between us in the industry. So it's Adam Thielen and DJ Moore, and you bench Tyler Boyd begrudgingly here. But the good news is that individual has 3 good options, Yasin. So I don't feel bad about getting any 2 of those 3 guys. Very close to them.
Cool. It was just announced that Byron Jones will be doubtful for the game. Does that change your mind on anything? My guess is you were already expecting him not to play, but how does that impact?
I mean, dude, just time to get sick on DK Metcalf. He's gonna. Byron Jones is the kind of guy that you need to cover those type of wide receivers. So if he's out, man, don't you know DK wants to do a little something to make up for last week too?
I think so. I hope so. All right, we have another question. Start Gage or Preston Williams over McLaurin this week?
No.
So the answer is no. Start McLaurin over Gage and Preston Williams.
Yep.
All right. Let's go back to what we were talking about earlier. We were talking about the Saints and the Lions matchup. We were talking about Traquan Smith. You think he's the better option over Sanders for any time that Mike Thomas is not a go. You think the beneficiaries are both Alvin Kamara and Traquan Smith are the main beneficiaries. But what if Thomas is good to go and he is playing?
Well, you feel awesome if you're a Michael Thomas owner because that's a little bit of a gift that came early, and you're just going to get him. You're going to get him in your lineup, right? Here's the thing. If it was an obvious, I've benched guys like Mike Evans and Julio Jones in this situation before. Other apex wide receiver ones that if I think they're going to be a decoy and they're basically kind of injured and it's a really difficult matchup, I'll sit them. But in this case with Michael Thomas, let's see, this would be it's a middling matchup against the Detroit Lions team who's had no problem seeding points to fantasy wide receivers in a 55 point total. So I'm playing Michael Thomas if he comes out, and if he does play, I'm a lot more worried about playing. At that point, you're downgrading Traquan Smith and Emmanuel Sanders and all those guys if you were in. I think one interesting question is: have you seen an update on Jared Cook? The last thing I had seen,
he was not at practice. Was the last thing I saw.
Up in the air.
Let me take a look. So, guys, while I'm doing that, this is Yasin from the Fantasy Life app, and we have Byron from Rosterwatch. So let me take a look at, you wanted Cook, right? Let's see what news we've sent out about him. I believe he was limited or did not. Yeah, he did not practice Thursday. And I believe he didn't practice Wednesday. Yeah, he didn't practice either day, so I don't yet know if he's going to be a participant in today's practice. I imagine if he is, it's going to be limited because it's a groin injury. So yeah, I'm not sure. It's been, from what I can tell from the wording that a lot of the reporters have been using, it seems like the reporters get the sense he will be unlikely to play or that he'll be limited if he does. So let's assume he'll be limited if he does play for now.
Well, if he's, it just, again, it'll depend on he'll be a marginal, tight end, low end, tight end 1, high end, tight end 2. It'll be definitely not a must start, and will certainly be contingent upon what your other options are. It's a middling matchup, the number 17 matchup of the week, potentially for Jared. I'll tell you, let me give you the sneaky insight here, though, Yasin, that if Jared Cook doesn't go, and I'm excited to say this, man, it looks like this sneaky play here. And I'm not necessarily recommending this in season long, but this could be like a DFS tournament player. Maybe you're in a 16-team league, super competitive, and you just don't have options. You got to look for a desperation option here. Our guy, Adam Troutman from the Senior Bowl. This is a young tight end who has a lot of Dallas Goedert to him. Another player that we saw at the Senior Bowl in recent years. And we were thrilled to see that Troutman was picked up by the Saints in the draft this year, Yasin. So I'm looking here because what we've known historically is that when there's a tight end, like a Jared Cook injury or a tight end 1 injury in New Orleans, sometimes you can pivot to their tight end 2 and get a sneaky bailout game from one of them. And in the past, we remember guys like Josh Hill, who's actually still on the team, but man, to my pleasant surprise here, I'm looking down here at the Week 3 snap counts for the New Orleans Saints, and it was our guy out of Dayton, Adam Troutman, 52% snap count. Now, the targets weren't necessarily there because those were still going to Cook and Sanders and Traquan, but Troutman actually led the New Orleans Saints in tight end snap counts in Week 3.
Well, let me ask about
that. Would be the sneaky player.
Let me ask about this specifically because I want to get some clarity here. So you're saying if Jared Cook doesn't play, you're excited about Troutman. Are you excited this week about Troutman, specifically about this matchup, or are you excited about the player in general?
I'm excited about the player in general. I'm excited about the opportunity to see him get the opportunity to maybe get a little more activity and see what he really looks like out there. So I'm not comfortable or confident or excited about playing Adam Troutman this week if that circumstance comes to bear. That said, I do think he could deserve some like super deep, sneaky, at least contemplation. I don't think it's not totally out of the question to consider whether Adam Troutman can produce this week if Cook is out.
Okay. I have new updates on Browns, and then we'll get to the questions that are asked in the chat right now. But Odell Beckham, he's full. He will play. He was not limited today, so he'll play. Questionable is Kareem Hunt. You also have a few other people that are questionable. So Kareem Hunt with groin injury. We just sent this out, about 30 seconds ago. So questionable is Kareem Hunt. Questionable is Denzel Ward with the groin injury. Joel Bitonio, the left guard, is also questionable. Vernon, the defensive end, also questionable. And they've ruled out Greedy Williams, Adrian Claiborne, and then Tay Davis, one of their linebackers. What do you think about what this means if Kareem Hunt does not play, and what impact it might have on the rest of their fantasy options?
I mean, I think this all mostly sounds good for the Dallas Cowboys, right? From a fantasy perspective and probably even from a real life football perspective, it'd be interesting to see Baker Mayfield back up there, kind of back in his Texas stomping grounds, playing at the Star. I know he'll get fired up for that one, but I think it's good for Dak and like all of those guys. I mean, it's potentially really good for Zeke because if this creates a situation where Dallas becomes a larger favorite and they're able to get the game script to where Zeke can get more action, then obviously that's good. I mean, if Kareem Hunt plays, I'm playing Kareem Hunt. If he doesn't play, there's nobody that really creates an opportunity for. It just enhances Nick Chubb's value in a game where otherwise Nick Chubb might have potentially been it could have been a tenuous matchup for Nick Chubb based on the way his usage has been. So I don't know. I think it makes you feel mainly a lot better about Nick Chubb if Kareem Hunt. But look, no Kareem Hunt. But the sneaky thing could be more Odell Beckham. Could be a few more targets for Jarvis Landry. Maybe the wide receivers who've been kind of lacking in targets could pick up a few extra if Hunt doesn't go because, I mean, look, we know sure as hell that Austin Hooper hasn't been getting them.
Cool. So this is going to definitely confuse people, and apologies here because we have to go with what the reporters say so that we full quote them. But Calvin Ridley is practicing today. The reporter wrote it as out for practice today. He is practicing. Calvin Ridley is in full gear. He has his helmet. He's catching passes. Do not panic with the wording there. Calvin Ridley is out at practice, so he is practicing. So just for clarity there. So Odell Beckham, full participant after being listed with a back injury. Kareem Hunt, just a little update on that. So Kevin Stefanski said that he looked pretty good in his first practice of the week. They're going to monitor how he feels over the next few hours. So it sounds like he's going to be a true game time decision, but we're going to maybe get some more clarity on that tomorrow. The Browns play at 1 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday. So expect to know by 11:30 Eastern or somewhere around then when the inactives are announced. Let's jump over to Cincinnati really quick. Normally I don't talk about defensive players because I don't think they have that much of an impact, but Geno Atkins he's a pretty big name. That's a big boy, and he's not expected to play. How does this affect their game against Jacksonville, if at all?
Yeah, that's killing me in my Dynasty IDP league right now. Geno Atkins has been a true anchor for me in that fantasy league for years. I mean, he's clearly his dominant force. So I think it's, what does that do? It's gonna alleviate the pass rush, and it's gonna open up the running game a little bit. So we just talked about James Robinson and how much we love him right now. That he's got these great matchups on the horizon, including this week. So you feel awesome about James Robinson if Geno Atkins is out, and it's one less thing that Minshew has to deal with.
So Geno Atkins is not expected to play, so that means James Robinson is up, which is good to know. Let's also talk about, so let's take a look at the other things that we just recently sent out. So Calvin Ridley out for practice today. Again, to clarify, he is practicing. The wording on that is very confusing, and I hate it, but it's what the reporter wrote. But the wording of that and the other things that I know are happening are that he is practicing. Today, he's catching passes. He's in full gear. So Calvin Ridley is practicing, for complete clarity to everybody. Let's talk about Julio Jones, both full dressed for practice with helmets. Talk to me about Julio Jones. He's somebody that typically plays through injury, and he tends to play through them very nicely. That doesn't always happen. We know recently that that's affected him. What are your expectations if he does practice fully today? It's a hamstring injury, soft tissue. That's not always the easiest to deal with. What are your expectations for Julio Jones if he does suit up? What does it mean if he does not suit up?
Well, clearly they really, really need him in this matchup, Yasin. I mean, at Green Bay, who's been playing really well this season, it's a 56.5-point expected game total coming off the sports books here. So, I mean, an absolute shootout. Like, it's the number 10 matchup for all fantasy wide receivers. If you got Julio Jones, maybe you are thinking of him more as like a low-end wide receiver 1 or high-end wide receiver 2 this week is probably an appropriate way to feel. But, he certainly has more upside than that. And I don't think they're bringing him back in this matchup to be a decoy. So I feel relatively confident in Julio Jones, and if he doesn't go, I mean, I don't even do I need to even mention Calvin Ridley? I mean, he's Calvin Ridley's already outperformed Julio Jones on the season, so if there's no Jones, you still feel like a king if you own Calvin Ridley this week. And I mean, I guess like you said, we talked about, somebody asked about Gage earlier. Obviously, he continues to come into focus. Look, Brian Hill, Todd Gurley has not been getting the targets this year that you would have expected. So, and we're seeing Brian Hill get involved and look very good this last week. So, if there's no Julio Jones or the limited Calvin Ridley or anything of that nature, I think you could see more of the running backs. It's probably especially Brian Hill this week.
Got it. So Julio Jones is back at practice. Calvin Ridley is practicing. These are both great news. We do have a question about Julio. Julio, are we trying to sell him? My personal opinion is you don't try to sell somebody when they're injured. So I want your opinion here, but I do not like selling people when they're injured. It means you're typically, like by definition, you're selling low. So what are your thoughts there? Is now the time to sell him?
No, now is not the time to sell Julio Jones unless you're in a must-win situation. Because then if you're in a must-win situation, you don't have the luxury to kind of pick and choose about the timing. Like if you're in a must-win, you can't just keep holding guys and hoping to get out of that ditch. Your season will be over before you know it. That said, if you've been a losing team and you have Julio Jones, like you feel good about getting him in and he can be one of the guys that helps you this week. So I don't think that there's a lot that really probably makes sense to sell Jones this week. But again, even if you're taking a little discount, if it's a must-win situation and you can make a deal that's going to help you win this week, which would most likely be trading Julio Jones for 2 players you view as starters that can help you this week, then that would be the only situation I'd really consider that in. But can't afford to keep losing.
Yeah. Let's bump back up to some of the other questions then. All right, Justin. So I've been saying this since that information came out. Yes, Calvin Ridley is practicing. He is practicing. I hate the wording that reporter used. But language-wise, but that actually means that he is practicing. He is out at practice. Yes, words can sometimes be hard, and I wish they would use simpler wording. He is practicing. He has his helmet. He's throwing and catching passes. Calvin Ridley is practicing today. Again, I can't control what the reporters say. We only push out what the reporters say. But yes, he is practicing, and apologies again about that. But we had a few questions, so let me go back there. We answered the one where we should sit Moore, Thielen, or Boyd. I think you said begrudgingly you would be sitting Boyd. Start Gage or Preston Williams over McLaurin. You said no. Scotty Miller or Brandon Ayuk, half PPR. I have an opinion here. I like Ayuk. I would play Ayuk. Who would you play?
I'd probably play Ayuk.
Okay, cool. Let's take a look. Start one in standard. Hollywood, Scantling, so MVS, Scantling or Jefferson. Who would you start in standard here?
Man, I'd like to get probably Hollywood Brown. I mean, I think you feel really good about Justin Jefferson. I'm not sure I feel quite good enough just yet to roll him out in that matchup. Against Houston. I'm just, we've seen it for only 1 week, so I think probably Hollywood Brown.
Yeah, I think we've tempered our expectations on Hollywood Brown since the beginning of the year. But I agree with you. I think it's too early to say Justin Jefferson's a must start because of one game.
And Hollywood's due. I mean, I know. Look, I mean, I understand statistics. There's nothing that means he has to go off this week. But the fact is, sooner than later, Marquise Brown is going to pop, and when he pops, it's going to be big. And I think that this is a get-right spot for a Ravens team who's probably got a very bad taste in their mouth after last week.
Yeah, so they're playing Washington, and it sounds like you expect this to be. I mean, what are your tools say about how much you're expecting the total score to be?
So let's see. We got the Baltimore. It's a 45.5-point game total, so not a big one, and certainly a game script that lends itself to Baltimore being, potentially big favorites, which all of this starts to favor the running back, the running backs a little bit, and Marquise Brown only getting 6 targets a game. He's the number one target on that offense, and I mean, if the Ravens are going to win by 13.5 points, you can flip this on its head. You can say, well, how are they going to score those points? And I think there's a chance that at least early in the game, it probably a pretty good chance some high value targets to Hollywood Brown.
So let's stay in Baltimore for a minute. Can we talk about their backfield in general? I mean, I think a lot of people have a lack of clarity there. I think we want to be excited about literally either of those running backs, and we can't. The numbers just don't support us getting excited about it. They're talented. They have potential. What are you expecting out of these guys, not just this week or in the next 2 weeks, but for the rest of the season?
Are we talking Ravens here?
Yeah,
Yasin?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited about buying low on J.K. Dobbins right now, or stashing it. Or what I'm seeing going around is people are so down on him that he's kind of an afterthought. They're willing to just kind of treat him as a throw-in on a deal. Like J.K. Dobbins is the type of dude I would happily accept as a throw-in, stash him on the bottom of my bench, and just wait to see what happens. I think that what we have seen, especially in the matchup against the Chiefs this last week, is that the Ravens are going to need more firepower, specifically out of their backfield, to compete with some of these higher scoring teams out there that they're going to see in the playoffs. And J.K. Dobbins is that guy. He is that guy in the backfield, and they drafted him very purposefully when they didn't necessarily need him.
Hey, I got to interrupt you. Chase Young has been officially ruled out. Bryce Love is heading to IR. That only affects me not having to include him on those on the inactive reports anymore. Thank you. Terry McLaurin is officially questionable. So we'll likely be seeing that shortly. But tell me what this means.
Yeah, it's a wheels up for Lamar Jackson rebound game. I mean, Lamar Jackson was a buy low in fantasy football leagues this week, and I think he's got the vengeance probably on his mind. And if he doesn't have to deal with Chase Young, that's huge, man, especially when you're a guy. the thing with Chase Young, with Lamar, he's a guy that could try to play that contain on the edge against Lamar Jackson. And once you lose a piece like that's a big chess piece to lose against a guy like Jackson who can run, just run the daylights out of you out there. So I think it's great news if you're a Lamar Jackson owner and you've been a little bit worried about what his status is this year. Like, this is just what the doctor ordered.
Cool. All right. So anybody that's here, please, again, Calvin Ridley is practicing. Terrible wording on that, but it's, again, correct the way that he worded it. It's just not a very human way of wording it. He is practicing. He has his helmet. He's catching and throwing balls. All right, so I am good to go for another 17 minutes. I'm not sure what your timing is, Byron, but a lot of these injury reports are coming out. You want to keep going?
Let's keep rock and rolling, dude.
All right, cool. So McLaurin is now questionable officially. Let's continue on there, especially because Chase Young is out. So why don't we go there?
I'm sorry, what were you asking about, McLaurin?
Yeah.
He's questionable. I mean, like I said, I think wide receiver 3. You don't feel great about Terry. I mean, let's look at it. I mean, let's look at the snap counts. So week 3, Terry McLaurin. I mean, like, he's the kind of guy, like, you get the ball in his hands, he's going to do some damage. So 98% snap count, week 3, Terry McLaurin, 8 targets, 86 yards. Week 2, Terry McLaurin, 94% snap count. He actually had quite a big week 2, 10 targets, 125 yards and touchdown. So hell yeah, you're starting Terry McLaurin if he plays.
Cool. All right, so somebody's asking about the various reports start dropping. Yes, they'll actually, we're looking to hopefully surprise you guys on either Saturday or on Sunday morning with some of the reports that we put out with some of the data and statistics. So we've been building them this week. We typically start them after we have 4 weeks of data. We're going to try to add them for you guys this weekend so you guys can have some of that stuff. Again, guys, Yasin here from the Fantasy Life app, Byron here from Rosterwatch, rosterwatch.com. Just so you guys have an idea of who Byron is, he literally goes to the training camps, knows these guys intimately, watches them, and really gets a good understanding of who they are, what they do, how they perform in training camp. It tends to map over very well to real-life performance when it comes to fantasy, and it makes Byron one of the best analysts when it comes to both DFS and fantasy for season long. So excited to have him here, and he'll be joining me throughout the next several weeks. All right, so Brian Mike has a question. PPR, injuries and COVID have my roster hurting this week, like a lot of other people. He needs help at running back too. His options seem to be Dobbins, Wilson Jr., or Hines. What do you think, Byron?
I want to say Dobbins. I think it's Dobbins or Wilson Jr. If there's no Mostert, I think you hate to chase Jeff Wilson's points. But if there's no Mostert, I mean, that running game is just too good. So I would say down to Dobbins, probably Dobbins or Wilson. And I probably give a edge to Wilson if Mostert sits.
Cool. Let's stay in San Francisco before we go to one of these other questions. Let's talk about McKinnon. So I am personally in a league that gives points for return yardage. So McKinnon always looks nice to me. But what are you expecting out of a guy like McKinnon for the rest of the year, especially as a guy like Mostert comes back? Has he earned enough to really cut into some of Mostert's production? They seem to be using him creatively. So what are we looking at with that backfield in general? Maybe over the next few weeks as Mostert starts coming back, and beyond that when Mostert's back full time.
I mean, I think it's always was going to be some version of a running back by committee in San Francisco. I mean, I know people got excited about the way that Mostert started this season, but I mean, really, if you look at it, he had 2 monster plays for massive touchdown, 90-yard touchdown, 80-yard touchdown. I mean, those were kind of the underlying contributors to the big production. And I think if you still looked at stat counts and touches, you always knew, as expected preseason, that in a Kyle Shanahan, this is eventually going to be some version of a running back by committee, one where there's enough of a split that it does affect the lead guy, but it looked like Mostert could be at least be the anchor there to where he could be the reliable one that you trust. I think McKinnon, dude, they've been trying. They paid him millions of dollars to be injured for 2 years. They could have let him walk this year when they had Matt Breida that they ended up trading in the draft, 4th-round pick. They got Coleman they just paid for the last offseason. But McKinnon basically came to the team and said, pay me whatever you want. I want to be a 49er. I'll take whatever you guys offer. So they offered him a small contract, and he stayed. And, to me, that shows that team is – they have a commitment to McKinnon. That's a guy that Shanahan evaluated 2-3 years ago when they brought him in, that he liked a lot in free agency to pay a big amount of money. And I think you can see he's healthy, and he gives them something that they don't have. So, I think McKinnon has earned a role moving forward, and it's probably hurt Tevin Coleman more than anybody. I think it's going to be hard for Coleman to find his way back into any kind of role that you can rely on.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So we had big news come out yesterday from Green Bay. Allen Lazard had core muscle surgery. He's out indefinitely. We have Adams, who practiced on a limited basis yesterday while that news was coming out. Lazard had an absolutely awesome game in the absence of Adams. Adams has been injured since the Lions game, and that was late September, September 20th or 21st. So he was doubtful last week. Couldn't go last week. It sounds like he's not going to be rushing himself back this week. It's a Monday night game. My feeling is if he's good enough to go, I feel confident rolling him out, but it's not a Sunday game. It's Monday night. I personally will be taking Davante Adams out of my lineups unless there is some significant upgrade in his status with tomorrow's practice report. Again, it's a Monday game, which means Saturday is their last day of practice reports. But unless that happens, I'm going to keep him out, and maybe begrudgingly. But what do you think of this Green Bay offense without Adams if he doesn't go this week? And then what does the Lazard injury mean for Adams moving forward?
Well, it's a monster matchup. It's the matchup that Allen Robinson went bananas in last week. So clearly it's a massive downgrade for the entire offense if there's no Davante Adams. That said, it's still one that I think could be taken advantage of. I mean, clearly Marquez Valdez-Scantling becomes a really, really appealing play if there is no Lazard or Davante Adams, 92% snap count, only 4 targets last week, but he's a lot like a Traquan Smith, Yasin. I mean, those two guys remind me an awful lot of each other. He's a big play dude. So if Scantling's volume goes up in this matchup, which is an absolute beauty, I think you'd have to be pretty interested. So I guess if I was the Davante Adams owner, if I was even thinking about waiting to deploy him on Monday night, I'd have to have somebody like a Valdez-Scantling or maybe a Gage on the other side of that matchup on my bench, just so that I had some insurance if Adams were to end up not going.
Makes sense. While we're in Green Bay, let's talk about your outlook on MVS.
I mean, this is a great spot. I think you should be interested in. He should be rostered right now, and basically any competitive format, probably 12 teams and over. And if I needed to play him as a flex or wide receiver 3 this week, it's not a guarantee, but I would do it and feel pretty confident about it.
Great. All right, we have some more questions rolling in, so let's jump to the chat a little bit. I think this is a good question. Who do you think is wide receiver 3 for Arizona? Snap counts say Keyshawn Johnson. Production says Andy Isabella. I actually don't have an opinion here. I'm not smart enough to know who the wide receiver 3 is or should or could be. You know this stuff better than I do, Byron. What do you say?
I don't think that's been determined yet. I think the team is still figuring that out. I mean, to me, it looks like a battle between 3 guys, Kirk, Isabella, and Keyshawn Johnson. I do think that one of the things that really stuck out was, even though Isabella got the touchdowns, it was, in Christian Kirk's absence, Keyshawn Johnson that got the big snap counts last week, and that's a guy they've always liked. They're in-house, and that's how these teams play it. They have their guys that they've scouted that they like. That's how James Robinson came to be in Jacksonville. They love that guy in-house. He was prized by their internal scouting. Like, that's their dude. They give him the opportunity. Keyshawn Johnson, a little bit like that in Arizona. So the answer is, and I don't mean to be, unclear here, but the answer is I don't think there is a wide receiver 3 right now in Arizona.
I think that's a fair answer. Somebody made a comment about our sound quality being poor and not matching our lips. It's the first time we're doing this, guys. Hopefully things will improve, but I'm surprised we haven't working up to this point. We've been live for an hour and a half without any major hiccups. So I think this is as good as it's going to get for the first time we're doing this. I'd give ourselves a B-, and that's about as good as I was hoping. All right, so we have more questions. With the injuries this week, thoughts on Ayuk versus Ward for this week? This person assumes that MVS is ahead of both, with or without Adams in play. Do you agree?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that is right. And then, Greg Ward with a lot of targets last week, and dating back to last year, he's been one of these guys that deep on the waiver wire when there's injuries to Alshon and Deshaun, at some point in the season you got to look about, how deep into the bottom of the barrel are you willing to reach? It's a very, very slimy move. So I think Greg Ward is like a pure desperation play that there is some rationale behind if you're an absolute pinch, but I think that's like the only way that he should be thought of this week.
Cool. All right, let's take a look at another question that we have. This person wants to know if they should go with Gesicki or Tanyan this week. I think it's Gesicki. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd roll with Gesicki's been hot, man. I'd go with Gesicki, especially no Jamal Adams. Like, Tanyan is a good Hail Mary if you're in tight end purgatory, but nothing more than that.
Cool. Then we have Jack is asking, they need help at RB2 in half-point PPR. They're wondering if they should trade away Keenan Allen for Kareem Hunt or Joe Mixon. What are your thoughts?
Not bad idea. So I think you can do a little better than Kareem Hunt.
I agree.
Who is really, based on his usage, is overperforming a little bit because he's been kind of touchdown reliant. So I think you'd be buying a little high on Kareem Hunt. That said, I do think he's like a viable running back option on a weekly basis rest of season. So maybe you could do a smaller deal than Keenan Allen for Kareem Hunt. That starts to make a little sense. I'll say with Joe Mixon, like, here's the deal with Joe Mixon. As of a week ago, Yasin, the plan was Joe Mixon gets this good matchup in week 4. Let's get his value up, and let's finally sell him high because we don't want this headache any longer. It's a terrible offensive line. For whatever Joe Burrow throws to the wide receivers, targets were supposed to be a big portion of Joe Mixon's value this year. Those simply haven't been there. But more concerning was the early season inputs. Much like you were talking about how more data comes in after the first 4 weeks, we get a big surge of data on the season that comes in week 4. And looking at it last week, was very concerned that Joe Mixon did not have any projected top 10 matchups again until week 13 and week 16, at which point your season was probably going to be over. So it was like, all right, I can't sell now because I'm selling him at the basement. Let's get this matchup at Jacksonville, see if we can get a dead cat bounce, get his value up, and then let's ship him off so we don't have to deal with this horrendous schedule the rest of the season. I think we should still be mindful of that. I will say I feel more comfortable for trading for Mixon now that we've gotten more inputs through on the data the first month of the season. That schedule appears it has eased up, and it won't be as quite of a nightmare as maybe it originally looked. So I do think Joe Mixon has some buy low appeal. You might want to do it before this matchup this week because I think this is a week where you'd want to play him if you're going to buy on him. Who I would turn my attention to is I would turn my attention to Todd Gurley, who the production's been there, but people potentially are a little low on him because of Brian Hill and because of the lack of targets. Todd Gurley has great matchups for the next 4 weeks. So if you're looking like we need to be winning now. So Gurley's a guy that can help you win now, that you won't feel guilty if you trade for Gurley. Like you give up Keenan Allen for Gurley, that doesn't feel gross. Like you're fine with that, right? And then the other one I would recommend is David Johnson, Houston Texans. He has great matchups for the next 5 weeks. Do I trust him long term? I'm not sure. Could he get hurt at any point? Of course, but he's clearly the lead guy. I think that the Texans' offense is about to heat up big over this stretch, and David Johnson's a player I think can really, really help you win for the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Awesome. So if anybody has any last questions, drop them in now. We're going to go into hopefully some rapid fire question and answer, and then we'll wrap up for the day, and I'll talk about what we're going to do moving forward. Burkhead or Hines, PPR.
Say that again. I'm sorry. Say that again.
Burkhead or Hines in PPR. Who are you going with this week?
Oh man, probably Burkhead. I'm not sure I'm thrilled about Hines against this Bears defense. I mean, neither of them are great plays, obviously, but probably Burkhead. But
Okay.
you're not going to get 3 touchdowns again. I mean, that was a one-outer. I mean, it's a horrible play, but it worked out. That's a tough decision. I don't know.
PPR with big play bonus. This person, Richard, wants to know if we could pick one for flex. Higbee, Watkins, AJ Green, or Brian Hill. Personally, I think Watkins or AJ Green have the big play potential, but what do you think, Byron?
You said Watkins, AJ Green,
Brian Hill or Higbee?
What'd you say? Did you say Tyreek Hill?
No, Higbee or
Okay.
Brian Hill.
Yeah, that's all I like. I think Watkins. We were talking about big playability here.
They get a bonus if they get big play. My guess is this means over 100 yards for the day, and it's PPR.
It's not going to be AJ Green. He's not going to. That doesn't look like that's going to happen. Right?
Womp womp. I like his targets, but fine, whatever. You're Byron. You probably know this stuff better than I do.
I like his targets too, Yasin. I mean, I'm not a hater, and I think that still can correct itself. But I think, the 100 yards is probably going to be a little bit difficult. I think Sammy Watkins is maybe the one. I mean, Higbee is probably the safe play. Gerald Everett's starting to cut into his snaps and targets this last week. I think Higbee's probably the safe play. I think Watkins is maybe the upside play there. And then, so you have to decide, I think, what your appetite is.
Okay. All right, some more rapid fire ones. Let's answer these quick. This person traded Madison and Gibson for Thielen and Ayuk. Was that a good trade?
If you needed wide receivers, it was fine.
All right. Thielen for Mixon. Is that a good trade in PPR?
That's a fine trade if you need to balance your starting roster.
Fine trade if you need balance. Great. Ingram or McKinnon this week in a standard non-PPR league.
Probably McKinnon.
All right. Watson or
Not
Murray?
a great matchup, but probably McKinnon. I mean, who do you try? I trust McKinnon, man.
I like McKinnon. I like McKinnon. I roster Ingram, and I don't trust their backfield very much.
If you're an Ingram owner, you feel good about this spot this week, and if he has the bounce back, you need to try your hardest to sell him. Anytime you can sell high on Mark Ingram, you need to try your hardest to do that. So
yeah.
I think if you've got Ingram, you feel good about this spot, but if I've got that decision point, I'm probably rolling McKinnon, man.
All right, Deshaun Watson or Kyler Murray this week?
Ooh. I think that depends on DeAndre Hopkins. If you have any reservations about Hopkins, just pivot to Deshaun Watson. But if you think we've got basically a fully available Hopkins, I'm taking Kyler Murray in a monster matchup.
And again, that game is at 1, so we'll find out early. So you'll have time to make that decision. What do you think about Harris's impact in New England rushing backfield? Damian Harris, I assume, impact on New England rushing backfield. That's not a rapid fire question. So, Byron, unless you have a quick answer, we'll go to the next one.
I think he's a good stash. That's what I think. I think it's a New England backfield that I wouldn't hold my breath or have too high hopes, but I think he's a good stash because he's probably the most talented guy with the most juice that they've got in the stable there. And by the way, if you own Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson, why the hell have you not tried to trade one of those guys?
Yeah, I agree.
You own both of those quarterbacks. You need to trade one of them.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Upgrade your starting lineup somewhere. Take one of those quarterbacks, take one of your flex plays that's overperforming, package those two guys up, ship them to another team for one better player in return that can upgrade your starting lineup somewhere, because you just got dead weight with Deshaun Watson or Kyler Murray on the bench. That's undermining your competitive, your ability to be competitive.
Yeah, I agree. All right, a few more rapid fire ones, then we got to wrap up. Gibson, start or sit? I personally think it's a start, depending on the rest of your roster makeup. But what do you think, Byron?
Yeah, I think if you aren't sure, it's probably because you don't have other great options. And I say don't outsmart yourself, start Gibson. I don't feel great about it, but I have him, and I know why this person's asking this. And mostly I come back around to the idea, like, unless you've had a Ronald Jones emerge or something this week for you, like, you're probably going to have to start Gibson.
Ayuk or Renfro?
Boy, I want to play Renfro this week. And we have any more news on Debo yet? I hadn't seen the update on that. Are we going to get Debo this week?
It's really unclear. We haven't sent. I've been monitoring that. My whole team's been monitoring that. We really don't have much info. I mean, he can come off IR really any time, and he's not included in the injury list because he's on IR. So we don't really. They're not obligated to give us an update. So we don't know much about Debo.
It sounds trashy. I think I'm playing Hunter Renfro in this one, man. He's in the Cooper Cup spot from last week. We have no Ruggs. We have no Brian Edwards. I don't see a situation where Hunter Renfro is not at least guaranteed a respectable number of targets.
Byron, I feel like this is the first answer you've given today where you're not convinced yourself and you feel like you're falling for a trap. If I'm reading between the lines, you're saying, I'm starting Renfro, but I feel like I know I'm setting myself up for disappointment. Am I reading between the lines correctly?
Well, anytime you're thinking about starting Hunter Renfro, you could be setting up for a trap. It just depends on if it's a booby trap, who's the booby, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully not you.
All right, so let's go MVS or Chark for flex. Give me a quick one.
Chark, man. I think you get Chark.
All right, Chark for flex. PPR, pick 3. Oh, boy. Chubb, Davis, I'm assuming of Panthers, Dalvin
Davis.
Cook, or Jonathan Taylor. I like all those guys. I'm personally sitting Davis. What do you think?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay.
He's the worst player of all.
Yeah.
Those other guys are awesome players.
Standard league, non-PPR, Marvin Jones or Hunter Renfro.
Dude, how can you trust Marvin Jones? I'm going with Hunter Renfro.
All right.
The accountant.
And then last question. We finally reached the bottom here, and then we can wrap up. What is your take on Gage now that Ridley is a go?
Just if a desperation, like if you're it's a pinch play. You don't love him. You can start him if it's like an emergency situation, but
yeah, he's no more than a flex for me.
I mean, I know he's had a couple, even with those guys playing, he's had some big games in terms of targets, but I don't see how you could feel confident in it. I think it's like you play him if you have to, and it's not horrible if you're in that situation.
Yeah,
it's about the best way I can put it.
Cool. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up for the day, but let me walk you guys through what's going to happen moving forward. So, guys, we've actually been waiting to go live for almost the past 2 weeks. We decided to eventually just do a 2-hour live today. We've been waiting for big news to drop while we've been on a shift of sorts to cover any big news that might have come out. I think what we're going to do moving forward are shifts like this where we're just covering everything. I think Fridays are good days for us to do this. Byron from Rosterwatch will be doing, along with some of his teammates as well, we'll be doing some start-sit combos in the app as well. I think we're going to do one tomorrow. So, it's, we would love to do this. How often we plan on doing it in the future, some of it is game scripts. It depends on the news that's coming out. There's a heavy injury day on Sunday. We might do it on a Monday. But I think we're going to be comfortable doing this on Fridays moving forward. For a few hours here and there. Let's see. I think that's really it. Again, this is Yasin from the Fantasy Life app, and we have Byron from Rosterwatch. Later today, we'll have Stefania Bell from ESPN on the app as well, answering injury questions. So we're hoping to continue doing this more often and eventually allowing us to go live right directly into the app itself. So thanks for joining us, guys. What do we say on YouTube? Like and subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Do it if you'd like. I don't know. We'll be posting it in the app. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this and it was helpful. Byron, anything to add?
No, man, that was great. You did a great job, man. You're a natural. So
You too, Byron.
Easy time working.